Well, with me here is Tom Edgington from BBC Verify. Tom, it has been a busy first few days with a number of spending announcements. Just take our audience through what has been announced so far.
Yeah, so the government has announced a series of measures throughout this week, mostly aimed at tackling the cost of living, but they're actually quite modest in terms of cost compared to overall government spending. So if you tot up each of these announcements throughout the week using the government's own figures, they come to about £1.5 billion a year in total. Now, that sounds like a lot of money on the face of it, but government spending this year is expected to be around £1.4 trillion. So it's actually a relatively small amount of money, about 0.1% of total spending. Yet despite that, there has still been questions about how some of those measures are going to be funded. So if you take, for example, the announcement to cut VAT off electricity bills, the government says that that is going to cost £850 million, and that will come from scrapping the digital ID scheme. But the government's own spending watchdog, the Office of Budget Responsibility, has already said it's not actually clear how that scheme was going to be paid for last year. So while scrapping it removes a future spending pressure, it doesn't actually automatically generate savings to fund this particular cut.
Now, we also had that announcement around the cap on bus prices. So let's go into that in a bit more detail in terms of whether that is fully funded.
Yeah, so this is going to cost £500 million, and that is going to come from changing how the UK funds international climate projects. So rather than giving grants, ministers say they will increasingly give loans to developing countries, and that improves the public finances on paper because loans have a lower upfront cost than grants, plus the government would expect to get that money back, plus interest, of course. But even though it's fully funded, economists are still saying there is a bit of uncertainty around the policy. So, for example, it's not currently clear how much the UK would expect to be paid back, nor what the interest rates would actually be. So there are still questions around that policy as well.
So those are the early announcements. The bigger tests, of course, are still to come in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, because these policies, as I say, are relatively modest, and Burnham himself has already signalled interest in much more ambitious but also much more expensive policies as well. So he's talked about reforming social care, large-scale council house building, and possibly changes to income tax thresholds. And each of these individually could add billions of pounds a year. But Burnham has also promised to stick with the government's fiscal rules, right? So not borrowing to fund day-to-day spending and getting debt falling by the end of the Parliament. So those larger ambitions, if they do become government policy, are likely to require much tougher decisions over tax and spending.
Tom, thanks very much. Thank you.